Flint Dibble does not understand maritime archaeology. If you don't know, Flint Dibble, an archaeologist, went on Joe Rogan with Graham Hancock to disprove Graham Hancock's lost civilization hypothesis. This video analyzes Flint Dibble's main argument and his supporting evidence pertaining to the Ice Age. I will show you with scholarly archaeology papers that Flint Dibble did not disprove Graham Hancock's lost civilization hypothesis. In fact, he got a lot of his information entirely wrong. I combined some older evidence I've used in past videos and some brand new information nobody has talked about. This is Illegitimate Scholar. I make videos about mainstream anthropology, but I am not limited by its biases. This video is not about Graham Hancock's hypothesis. It's only about Flint Dibble's argument against Graham Hancock. This argument has been going on for about a year. Coincidentally, right when I went to release this video, this guy, Professor Dave, made a video supporting Flint. Of course, he didn't fact check Flint at all, but I'm going to. So we're going to start with understanding what Flint's main argument is. And then throughout the video, on each individual topic, we can connect it back to Flint's main argument.
I'm here to present what I see are two clear disproofs of a lost advanced Ice Age civilization.
All right, food and Ice Age. We're just going to talk about the Ice Age in this video.
I really want to focus on Ice Age coastlines, evidence from Ice Age coastlines and excavations, underwater evidence from the Ice Age.
Ice Age coastlines.
The thing is, at this point, we have something like 3 million shipwrecks from around the world.
3 million shipwrecks, huh?
And so one of my questions for Graham is, if this is a global civilization with ships, why is it that we don't have shipwrecks from this global civilization? I see this as a big, big problem. If we're looking for a civilization that's traversing the oceans, we should find these shipwrecks.
So if there is a civilization traversing the oceans, we should find those shipwrecks.
And similarly, these shipwrecks are located near the coast. They're located on the submerged continental shelves. We are actually exploring these submerged continental shelves in detail.
Okay, so he wants to disprove Graham's theory. Two main topics, Ice Age and food. We're just going to talk Ice Age today. He wants to focus on Ice Age evidence, and he wants to show, based on all the Ice Age evidence that we have, as well as evidence of later shipwrecks, that we would have found Graham's civilization if it had existed. So again, this video is only about Flint's argument. It's not about Graham Hancock or his ideas. There will be people in the comments anyway. But you can think that Graham Hancock is wrong and also understand that Flint Dibble misrepresented archaeology in his disproof. They cannot both be right, but they can both be wrong. Okay, we're going to start with a site I've talked about in earlier videos, but I promise you this video is mostly new information.
I want to share this kind of evidence. Some of it's new, some of it's not, but I think it's the kind of thing that has a direct bearing on looking for such an Ice Age civilization.
Okay, so Flint is talking about this kind of evidence with a site on the screen. He's talking about how it has a direct bearing on his arguments, and yet he gets the site wrong. He has right on his slide, Younger Dryas over 9,000 years ago is how old it is. The Younger Dryas is the end of the Ice Age. It's the last couple thousand years. I'm just going to use Wikipedia for this one because it's so simple. The Younger Dryas ended 11,700 years BP, which actually means before 1950, but that's another video. The site is not from the Ice Age or the Younger Dryas. At least it's not definitely from the Ice Age or the Younger Dryas. The author doesn't even call it an Ice Age site. He calls it a Stone Age site, which extends from the end of the Ice Age into the Holocene, which is our human epoch. It's a kilometer-long wall that the archaeologists think was used to hunt reindeer by running them along the wall and capturing them in an enclosed area. It says in the abstract, during the Younger Dryas or early pre-boreal phase, which is the beginning of the Holocene, that's after the Ice Age. So if you read the article, it tells you that there actually aren't any human artifacts. They have a whole argument in the paper about why this is human in origin, even though there isn't any artifacts found on it. I have to take them at face value, and frankly, I do. But the issue is with the age of the site. But they do have carbon dates from the site, or at least near it. One of them was taken about 800 meters away. The other one was taken 10 meters away. And both of these dated samples come back with a date at the earliest 1,000 years after the end of the Younger Dryas. They have a whole argument in the paper about why it might be the oldest megalithic structure ever. I'm not concerned with that argument itself. What I'm concerned with is for this site that Flint likes, that supports his argument, Flint has one level of evidence that he requires. He's comfortable presenting this as a Younger Dryas site. But later in the episode, when they're talking about Gunung Padang, Flint insists that a wall, specifically a wall, which is also what this hunting wall is, must be dated from material that is under the wall so that you know that the stones to make the wall were placed on that old soil.
None of those cores came from that tunnel or chamber or any of those features that they described. So there's this megalithic architecture there, and he's gone down in all the different terraces and along many of the different walls and excavated below them so that you can get datable material from under the walls that are visible.
So there's already a difference in standards for a site that Flint likes and one that he doesn't for his argument. And on Flint's own channel, Jessica Cook-Hale, an actual maritime archaeologist, called the idea that this is the oldest megastructure ever found a bit of hyperbole.
What do you think about this find? Is this really the oldest megastructure ever found?
Well, it is a bit of hyperbole to some extent.
Okay, now shipwrecks.
And the shipwrecks, what's the oldest one that we've found so far?
Well, there was one that was just published from about, I think it was about 7,000 years ago off the coast of Italy that I saw.
6,000 or 7,000 years ago, there is no shipwreck off the coast of Italy that we found. There are a few canoes, and you might say, oh, this doesn't matter. They're canoes. They're still boats. So it shows the preservation. But they're from a freshwater lake. They're not from off the coast, which is very different because these are different environments for preservation. We're going to get into way more of this. If the canoe was actually found in the ocean, it would be different. It would be a stronger argument. But since it's found in a freshwater lake, which is better for preservation, both because of the lack of salinity and also because of the lack of tides that can affect the shipwreck site, this is not a good one-to-one comparison with the ocean. And we're going to talk about a lot of reasons why in this video. The actual oldest shipwreck is the Docus. It was found in the Mediterranean. And remember, this isn't the open ocean. It's the sea, the Mediterranean Sea. It's more inland. It does have waves, but not as strong as those in the ocean. And the Docus is about, at the latest, almost 5,000 years old, not 6,000 or 7,000. The ship itself was gone when they found it. The wood was gone, but they found it based on the ceramics pottery that's lined up in the shape of a ship, and they know, oh, there was a ship there, but it's gone because it deteriorated. So let's go into some ocean preservation now.
Well, so actually underwater environments are really good for the preservation of organic remains.
This is true. Underwater environments are good for preservation in general.
So in general, wood will decay. So, in a lot of underwater environments, it'll just preserve as long as it's in homeostasis.
Statement itself is mostly right, but it's not as relevant based on some other stuff we're going to talk about. This is really only if the site itself is covered in soil, which makes it very difficult to find, or if it's in a very, very specific environment, something like the Black Sea, which is anaerobic, lack of salinity. All this stuff's going to come together. Flint builds false and misleading claims on top of other false and misleading claims. So we have to talk about all of this in its entirety. If you're liking this so far, I would really appreciate giving the video a like. Let's play the rest of the clip, and then we're going to talk specifics of preservation.
Would it stay that way for 20,000 years, you think?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's this idea that things just decay the older they are, and that's really not true.
So not really. It's not going to stay for 20,000 years. Maybe in the most perfect environment, but there's a bunch of reasons why that will not happen almost ever. And also why it doesn't make sense. So we're going to talk about how historical shipwrecks and marine environments are continuously decomposed by wood-degrading organisms. I'm putting all the titles of these articles. All of them are open source, so you can Google these titles yourself. Waterlogged archaeological wood suffers from microbial degradation. Decay was related to sample age. So the age of the sample is relevant for how decayed it is, and also wood species and environmental factors. We're going to discuss what those environmental factors are. I'm going to show you a bunch of these articles so that it just is hammered in how much this has been studied, how much the degradation, deterioration of wood underwater has been studied. Waterlogged wood experiences varying degrees of degradation. There are a bunch of different factors, where it is, what type of wood, and these archaeologists are saying that even if it seems intact, it has still undergone significant microstructural and chemical changes. So it's being broken down. The wood is broken down by being in the water because of the microbiomes there. Okay, so this is from NOAA, which is a massive nautical organization from the US government. Maritime heritage sites are impacted by natural factors such as storms, currents, and breakdown by shipworms and other marine animals. And then there's human impacts as well. But there are a lot of things that can screw up a shipwreck. So now another article, this is even earlier, and they're referencing several authors, some of which we've already seen, that discuss microbial degradation in wood, even buried in the sediment, even if it's seemingly protected by a layer of sediment. Seems like even in anaerobic environments, usually anaerobic environments are good for preservation. They're better than aerobic environments that have a lot of oxygen in them. So this is from UNESCO, which Flint was very proud to cite. As his source for 3 million shipwrecks that are mapped. Not really. And they say it is impossible to stop the deterioration of underwater archaeological sites altogether. So yes, overtime matters. They spend some time discussing how a wooden ship can survive in the perfect environment, which is low temperature, low light, low oxygen, and minimal current. Also low salinity. I don't know why they don't bring that up. They're discussing an 1813 wreck and a 1628 wreck. These are not thousands of years old sites. These are sites that are a few hundred years old that are still deteriorated, but not that deteriorated. I've seen Vasa in person. It is incredible, but it's also a ship in cold water off the coast of Denmark on an inland sea with brackish water that has low salinity. It's the perfect environment short of the Black Sea, which is completely anaerobic. The point is there are a lot of things that can screw up a shipwreck. The ships aren't just staying for 20,000 years. Look, there's more. I just want to show I could do a whole video on each one of these factors for shipwrecks. But the point is that preservation underwater is not as good as Flint claimed it is. So beyond preservation, the low light, anaerobic, shipworms, all these things that can screw up a shipwreck, Flint was still talking about homeostasis. So the idea is that if a ship is in homeostasis, if it's stable, it will survive essentially indefinitely. Flint says 20 or 30,000 years. We saw some sources just now that showed us that waterlogged wood can still have issues. It does still have degradation of its structure, but there's a bigger issue with this. And a question that Joe asks Flint really reveals some key information.
Typically, when things are buried, they're very stable. Or when they're, sitting, it depends on where you are on the bottom of the ocean. But typically, it's very, very stable.
Now, what about the shifting of sediment at the bottom of the ocean when you're dealing with things like 10, 20,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago?
I was just talking with Jessica Cook-Hale out of Bradford about this. She's done some studies off the coast of Florida of sort of hurricanes that are coming in today because she's excavating Stone Age shell mounds there. And it turns out, actually, that the hurricanes coming in today really don't disturb them much at all.
So he references Jessica Cook-Hale's work. And by the way, she didn't do anything wrong. Don't go after her. This is Flint's interpretation of her work and what it means, not her doing anything. As far as I can tell, she's just a great maritime archaeologist who's committed to the field. But she tells Flint about the preservation of shell-midden sites on the coast of Florida. So these are heaps of shells that would have had oysters, maritime resources that people consumed a long time ago, a few thousand years ago. And she studied how the shell-midden sites were preserved when 2 hurricanes came in over about a year period, 2 seasons. And this is not a good argument from Flint because in maritime archaeology, most of the work is done on shipwrecks. So the effect of storms on shipwrecks is studied quite a bit. So let's look at what storms do to shipwrecks. If you follow Flint's argument in totality, if you accept that homeostasis protects a ship, and also that storms don't affect ships once they're covered, then it might seem likely that a shipwreck could survive for 20 or 30,000 years. But the thing is that shipwrecks are affected by storms and waves. This is the North Carolina Office of State Archaeology discussing how changing conditions in sites affect those sites, which makes sense. The environment is dynamic. This is just a news article of a 19th century shipwreck coming up on the beach after a storm. It was uncovered by hurricanes. So yeah, maybe a hurricane does affect a shipwreck. This is another news article. If I'm using news articles, it's because the argument is really that stupid, by the way. But they're interviewing a maritime archaeologist. They're studying the effect of hurricanes on shipwrecks off the coast. And this comes with a presupposition. This guy, who is a maritime archaeologist, is talking about how this heritage is at risk because of increased storm activity. So he's studying the effects of these storms on shipwrecks because he already presupposes that shipwrecks are affected by hurricanes. He knows that, and they want to protect them. The goal is to access the shipwrecks, document them, and study shifting sand and see if there are ways to protect wrecks from future storms. So yes, shipwrecks are affected by storms. And this is just Jessica Cook Hale's article where she's discussing the relation of the storms to the coastal shell midden site. And she even says right in the introduction that tropical cyclones, hurricane systems can disturb submerged archaeological deposits. She cites a bunch of articles. It's been widely discussed, mostly in the context of shipwrecks. So she's completely aware of this. Flint just took her one study, which was related to shell midden sites, and expanded it without doing a second Google search, I guess. Okay, status report. Kowalski. Flint claimed the oldest shipwreck was 4,000 to 5,000 BC, but it's actually 2,700 to 2,200 BC. He claimed that shipwrecks last in the ocean indefinitely-ish, 20 to 30,000 years, but that's not really true. He claimed that storms do not affect shipwrecks, but they do. The ship's just not going to stay in homeostasis. That's the problem. The environment changes, it shifts. And also, anything from the Ice Age would be so deep, hundreds of feet, that it would be very, very difficult to find. And if it is protected by some combination of Goldilocks factors, it's going to be covered and very difficult to find at a very, very deep depth. Okay, now we're going to get into Flint overstating how much archaeology has been done.
And similarly, these shipwrecks are located near the coast. They're located on the submerged continental shelves. We are actually exploring these submerged continental shelves in detail.
Okay, but which submerged continental shelves? It's mostly Europe is the thing. And I'll talk about Flint's Eurocentrism another time. It's too much for this video, but a lot of them are not being studied, specifically the ones that Graham wants to concentrate on. And Flint continues to revert back to evidence from Europe and the east coast of North America. Depth is also important. When Flint talks to Jessica Cook Hale, she discusses why the sites she works on are so easy to work on.
The sites we're working on are very easy to work on because they're all in less than 10 meters of water.
We've had 200 feet of sea level rise since the Younger Dryas.
200 feet seems harder than 10 meters. But regardless of that, we have a ton of shipwrecks in the archaeological record, right? 3 million? This passage is key to Flint's argument.
Graham has mentioned that the bulk of marine archaeology has focused on shipwrecks and not the continental shelves. And so the thing is, at this point, we have something like 3 million shipwrecks from around the world.
So the rest of this in a moment, but just notice that Flint connected this 3 million number to maritime archaeology.
And so one of my questions for Graham is, if this is a global civilization with ships, why is it that we don't have shipwrecks from this global civilization? I see this as a big problem. If we're looking for a civilization that's traversing the oceans, we should find these shipwrecks.
He talks about where marine archaeology has concentrated on, and then he said we have 3 million shipwrecks from around the world. And then he asked, why don't we have shipwrecks from your civilization? Based on the amount of shipwrecks that we have, 3 million, based on all of the factors that he's discussed, he says, why don't we have shipwrecks from your civilization if we have all of this? We would have found them. We definitely would have found your shipwrecks from your civilization if they existed. So Flint already admitted that the 3 million number was an estimate, and the actual number is 300,000. And in admitting this, he discussed how 300,000 shipwrecks have been explored.
Instead of 3 million, there's 300,000 shipwrecks that have been explored. And it doesn't change the substance of my point about shipwrecks and the extent of the exploration that underwater archaeologists have done.
And he says the actual number being only 10% of his original number, it doesn't change the substance of his argument. It actually doesn't. But that 300,000 number isn't quite accurate either.
We have something like 3 million shipwrecks from around the world.
So what is Flint referencing here? Here's the article that he was looking at. It's from a journal called Bioscience. It's about the use of shipwrecks for a habitat for living creatures, including some of the same parasites we discussed earlier briefly when talking about preservation. And it's totally fine for researchers to use data from other sources that are outside of their field, but it has to be relevant. But what Flint has done is taken data from a bioscience journal and then claiming that that data has a bearing on how much maritime archaeologists have explored the ocean. To know if that's true, we have to actually look into the data, which we're going to do. And this right here is the exact article that Flint was referencing, and these are the data points with their sources. So let's look at these. Okay, so we have 4 maps. We have Europe, North America, Australia and Oceania, as well as Ireland. We're going to skip Europe because this data is legitimate. I've discussed this before in other videos. Maybe check those out, subscribe, do whatever you want. I don't know if you like this. We're going to skip the Europe data because it is actually legitimate. It's less than 2,000 ships. I've discussed it in a few other videos. Most of these have not been excavated, which is fine. One is a dead link to the NOAA website. I tried to find the data somewhere else. It was hard to do, but the data from Ireland and Australia will be plenty sufficient. So if I go to the Ireland link here, it lets me download the data that they have as a Excel document. So getting into the data, starting with the oldest shipwreck, it is from 1306. The description of it says that it wrecked in a severe storm, the ship broke up, and the cargo washed ashore. So this is not really a shipwreck that exists in the archaeological record. In fact, for all of these earlier shipwrecks coming from the 1300s, 1400s, 1500s, they don't have latitudes and longitudes because either they're gone and they're just in this record as a record of shipwrecks that existed rather than physical shipwreck sites, because this is not about archaeology, even though Flint said it was. These are not in the archaeological record. 000, we're getting into the 1600s. Okay, so there's one from 1690. We're going to assume that this is real. Doesn't really change much that one of them has a site. And, you know, this one has a site from 1709. There's no details in it. More that are 00, latitude 0000000. 1700s. This is what this data is. Okay. And sure, there are thousands, tens of thousands, almost 20,000 wrecks here, but not all of them. In fact, actually, most of them, you can see all these zeros, they don't have locations because they aren't in the record. These are ships that went down that are in the record because they were annotated somewhere that they went down. They're not archaeological finds. That's just not what this is. So for the Bioscience Journal, it doesn't matter because it's relevant to them that there are shipwrecks in the water. It doesn't matter if they know where they are because they know where some are and they can study those, and they know that other shipwrecks are other places and we don't know where they are, but they are still habitats for marine life. That's the point. But this has no bearing on the archaeological record because it's not archaeological data. Okay, now let's look at Australia. So we have 12,289 ships in this database from Australia. But what happens if I put in 1,800? How many ships are before 1,800 in this database? 43. 43 ships before 1,800. If you go to the map, there's 29 results because not all of them are on the map. Again, these are mostly modern shipwrecks that are placed in the database for reasons other than maritime archaeology, because this is not about maritime archaeology. The one in the Mediterranean it had less than 2,000 ships, but this data that Flint tried to present as evidence of the exploration that maritime archaeology has done is just not about archaeology. It's not about shipwrecks that are historically relevant. Some modern shipwrecks are relevant to archaeology and they are studied by archaeologists, like the Titanic or something. But most of the time, that's not the case for things like this. They have to annotate where ships are for something like NOAA so that if a large boat is going in that area, they know where a shipwreck is. Maybe it went down in the 1800s and it's there and it's a hazard and they don't want to get their ship caught on it. It's things like that. It's not about maritime archaeologists exploring and finding these shipwrecks. And Flint tried to present it as such because it helps his argument that they've explored every inch of the ocean. There's 3 million shipwrecks. Oh, wait, it's 300,000. Oh, wait, never mind. It's not 300,000. At least not 300,000 that are relevant to archaeology or have anything to do with archaeology. And honestly, the 300,000 number, which is still not relevant to archaeology, when you compare that to the 3 million estimate, it kind of shows that they've only found 10% of the shipwrecks that exist in the ocean. It shows that there's a lot to still be explored. And if you believed that the 300,000 number meant that 10% of the shipwrecks that are in the ocean have been found by maritime archaeologists, then it's actually a pretty good percentage of them. But the vast majority of those are not found by archaeologists. That's not why they're in these databases. If you're liking this so far, please subscribe. And if you're feeling very generous, I would really appreciate people signing up for my Patreon, $5 a month. Link is below. What about Flint's other data? Let's talk Paleolithic Radiocarbon database.
The Radiocarbon Paleolithic Europe database. So when you're talking about the Ice Age, we have radiocarbon dates directly dated from 13,000 sites in Europe and Siberia.
Do we? Do we have 13,000 sites, Flint?
I think that's sort of like, why do we keep finding tens of thousands of Ice Age sites that are hunter-gatherers? It's a bit of a coincidence we don't find your civilization. Here,
It's not tens of thousands, it's 3,000 sites.
that's not true. We have 13,000 different sites in the Paleolithic Radiocarbon database.
It's funny because this was a miscommunication, but it actually turned out being pretty true. Graham was discussing that there are 3,000 underwater sites cited by Nicholas Fleming, who is a marine scientist, that exist in the archaeological record before 3000 BC, 3,000 sites worldwide. The age range is 5,000 years before present, 1950, from 1950, to over 300,000 years old. And most sites are after 20,000. But Flint was discussing 13,000 sites that are in the Paleolithic Radiocarbon database. So let's look at the database. So if you go here, Flint was showing on his screen a journal article that was basically introducing or discussing this database, but this is the database that is linked from that journal article. And so it says here there's 20,000 radiometric data. That's carbon-14 and AMS, which is another, and they have over 20,000 radiometric data. This is mostly carbon-14 dating, but there are other types of dating that they have in the record. It has 14,277 site forms. It had about 13,000 when Flint accessed the data, but it says site forms, not sites. So a site form is not necessarily a site. A site doesn't necessarily have only one site form. So let's download the data. So the database has over 20,000 dates, mostly carbon-14, but some other methods of dating as well. And it has 14,277 site forms. It was about 13,000 when Flint accessed the data, and now it's 14,000, but it's site forms, not sites. And a site can have multiple site forms. So let's download the data and just take a look. So we're in the all category here. And I've locked this top layer. So we're in the all category here. I've frozen this top layer. And you can see there are a bunch of archaeological sites with data points, coordinates, the method of dating. And so you can see here, this is all of the data points, each individual artifact or each individual data point. These are different objects, like there's a bone, a piece of charcoal, these types of things. These are all individual, and they have their site names on them, right? But what we can do is we can sort it by site name, and we can see that a lot of these are from the same site names. But you'll also notice that while the site name is the same, this place, I don't know, Ambrosievska, and there are multiple layers, and it's the same site. You can see that the coordinates are the same, but over here you see IDs, and these IDs correspond not to the site, but to the site form, which is where that number of 14,000 or 13,000 back then came from. So if you go down to the bottom, you see all these, and then you use a command called count unique over this area, which is this entire section, all the different site names. You get the unique names that are in these cells, which is 3,538, which, since each site name is the same, that is the number of sites that you have. Not 14,000, not 13,000, but 3,538. It seems like Flint didn't open the database, or he very, very briefly looked at it enough to not notice that site forms did not mean sites. I don't know why he assumed this. You get a new layer, you have another field season, you excavate a part of the site. It might have one site form that time, and then you go back the next season and you get another site form. Happens all the time. You reopen a site. I mean, you can go to a site and go back 40 years later, even more. Ugh. But yeah, it's 3,538. But wait, it's actually not. Because what you'll notice when you start going up here is that this right here, this is the same site. But this is then counted in the count unique. But this is then counted as two different sites because even though it's the same site, it was annotated differently. And if there's a mixed place capital, a comma, an extra space, it's going to show up as a second site. But you can see that it's the same site because it has the same coordinates. And I'm not going to go through 20,000 data points to figure out the exact number of sites. I know that it's not 13,000. I know that it's less than 3,538. And if you look through here, you can just kind of get an estimate of how many doubles, triples, quadruples there were. As you can see, all of these right here, this is the same site. You can see based on the coordinates that this is the same site, even though it has a slightly different name, which is going to be counted multiple times. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 unique names that are counted as 4 in that 3,538 number. And this is pretty common if you go through the whole article. I'm just scrolling up from the bottom here. You can see like this. I'm scrolling up from the bottom here and you can just see them. Not all of them have multiple unique ways of showing the site. So not all of them are going to be doubled up like that, but a lot of them do. I'll scroll to a random spot here. 20,000 goes so slow. So, some of them do. It's less than 35, 38. I'm comfortable with that. Right here, same site. Oh, this is all the same site. Just blank, number 1, number 2, Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, then shows up as 5 sites in my count unique thing. So it's not perfect, but I'm not going to spend 10 hours going through all this data. But you get the point. It's less than 3,538 sites. So, site forms. Yeah. Flint even repeated this on his own channel and other podcasts.
The Paleolithic Radiocarbon database for Europe, I think it had something like 13,000 different localities.
Yeah. You'd fail my class, Flint. If I just check a random claim by Flint, there's a good chance it's exaggerated. Like here with Clovis points.
We can go to North America where we have 12,000 different sites, I think it is, with Clovis points.
We don't have 12,000 Clovis sites. It's actually an author that I really like, Charles C. Mann. So this is from the Smithsonian, Clovis points, and it's actually 1,500 sites. Flint said it was 12,000. I don't know why. He just exaggerates, makes up numbers. I don't get it. You can check any random claim, and sometimes it just comes back wrong for no reason. Or maybe there's a reason. Maybe it's to create a narrative that archaeology has done more than it actually has done in order to dissuade people from believing in the legitimacy of Graham's hypothesis. But it's not honest. I mean, he has a slide. He has a slide on it. Why didn't he write this down? Why didn't he write down the number of sites? Why just make this claim randomly? Why make all of them? If you just did 1 or 2 or 3, whatever, people misspeak, they misremember. This is something different. Okay, another status report. Flint claimed there were 13,000 Paleolithic sites in Europe. There are actually less than 3,600. Not all of these are even from the Ice Age, by the way. The Paleolithic includes after the Ice Age for a little bit as well. He claimed there were 12,000 Clovis sites. There's actually 1,500. And now let's talk Ice Age seafaring.
So we have just so much Ice Age evidence, and Graham usually ignores it.
We have so much evidence for seafaring during the Ice Age, and Flint usually ignores it. Several prominent maritime archaeologists have published on Ice Age seafaring. It actually goes back to like the 1970s. This includes Erlandson, who Flint cited during another part of the podcast for his Kelp Highway hypothesis, which has essentially become the successor to Clovis first for the people of the Americas. So we're going to discuss the evidence of seafaring during the Ice Age and why it's relevant to Flint's argument. I don't think Flint knows what is in the Kelp Highway hypothesis paper. I've read it. I don't think he has. So this is that paper, which is actually a paper about Ice Age seafaring using boats to migrate across oceans. He discusses here the evidence for anatomically modern humans, colonizing Australia 50,000 years ago, as well as Japan, the Ryukyu archipelago, the islands there. He talks about the evidence of Homo sapiens traveling across open ocean, shorter lengths, to the Ryukyu Islands in Japan, as well as Australia, but without boats from the Ice Age, even though they know that people were traveling across the oceans. How do they know that humans were traveling across the ocean? It's because they date sites that are in locations that at the time people would have had to travel over distances of water to get there. So they know that they got there. They had to come by boats unless they swam 50 kilometers. And this goes back tens of thousands of years into the Ice Age. Nobody ever found a boat. Doesn't seem to bother the maritime archaeologists, but it seems to bother Flint a lot. Current evidence suggests, however, that anatomically modern humans had colonized or explored several archipelagos in the eastern Pacific by 50,000 to 30,000 years ago, islands that could only be reached with seaworthy boats. They talk about the last glacial maximum, LGM. That's when the sea level was very high. This is the Kelp Highway hypothesis. It's a theory of coastal migration using boats. It is about Ice Age seafaring. Where are the ships from this migration, Flint?
If we're looking for a civilization that's traversing the oceans, we should find these shipwrecks.
Here's another article, Plant Working and Seafaring. It's about these boat building sites and materials that would be used to build boats in Pleistocene, that's Ice Age, Wallacea, that's basically Indonesia. So while the presence of fossils and artifacts provide ample evidence that early modern humans were able to cross the open ocean. So again, this article is from 2025, but they are building on decades of evidence. I'm going to show you some older stuff in a minute. They can cross open ocean. Traces of plant working and boat building in coastal sites during the Pleistocene. They're trying to reconstruct what kind of boats they used, basically. This article is another one from Erlandson from 2002. Anatomically Modern Humans, Maritime Voyaging, and the Pleistocene Colonization of the Americas. And this is Erlandson, same guy that did the Kelp Highway hypothesis. And I wanted to share this site because it has a chart in it which shows all the different places that people were going and at what year. So you can see the references, 1998, 1988. These are old references. This has been known for a long time. These ones at the bottom, this is in Ice Age, but that's fine. Flores, 800,000 years ago, there's just a little bit of evidence that Homo florensis or Homo erectus, a past early hominin species, actually got to an island over ocean 800,000 years ago. It's just one site. That's pretty crazy. With one site, it could be some sort of fluke, some sort of error in the data somewhere else. Maybe there was a land path. Maybe they rode dolphins. Who knows? It's one site, so whatever. But regardless, there's a bunch of sites for the Ice Age for 15, 25, 30, 40, 50, 60,000 years ago on New Guinea, Crete, Bismarck Archipelago, Melanesia, which is very important for the progenitor of a lot of the cultures from the Pacific, the Polynesians, but this is well before that, 35,000 years ago. 30,000 in Sicily, Ryukyu Islands, Japan, other places in Japan. This is multiple continents. This is Asia. This is Oceania. This is Europe. And there are also places in the Americas, I think, Baja, California, that's not on this list. Sue O'Connor, prominent maritime archaeologist, 2022, terminal Pleistocene. It's the end of the Ice Age, emergence of maritime interaction networks across Wallacea. This is Indonesia. Modern humans, 50,000 years ago. Sahul, this is it's farther east. It's the area north of Australia. And it's showing these places, and it's showing the gray here. The dark gray is today. The light gray is where it was during I think the last glacial maximum, or at least when it was higher up, when the sea level was higher up. So this is showing the evidence of similar material culture. These nice charts here are showing obsidian that is from one source but ends up in all these different places. Archaeologists can tell from the specific signature on the mineral or stone or whatever it is for certain materials where the source actually came from. That's how they discovered recently that the the altar stone on Stonehenge was from Scotland for some reason. Like not even lowland Scotland. We're talking like highlands. Apparently they think they took it down by boat. I don't know how. It's hundreds of miles. It's crazy. But I digress. The point is they find material culture like these things in different areas. They find the source of material being found. They find obsidian that is sourced one place and it's found across the area where they would have had to take multiple long boat trips. People were going across oceans during the Ice Age, and we don't have any boats. So why don't we have boats?
We should find these shipwrecks.
Yeah, according to your logic, Flint, we should have shipwrecks. So why don't we? But maybe Flint didn't mean traversing the oceans as in traversing the oceans. Maybe he meant it as farther than 50 or 100 kilometers. Maybe that's not long enough for him. Maybe for some reason, the boats that would do that would not preserve as well as a larger boat. Maybe we actually don't have examples of these shipwrecks from the Ice Age because they're too small or some other BS excuse from Flint that allows him to move the goalposts. Giving Flint the benefit of the doubt, maybe he was just wrong about shipwreck preservation and made these other mistakes on the amount of sites in these databases and how much archaeology has been done. Maybe that's what happened. Flint likely won't address me or this video. I hope he does. But he likely won't because he's entirely wrong. What can he say in response? But if he were to address me, he would likely shift the argument to what actually preserves, not the wood oftentimes, but the ceramics.
Those thousands and thousands of shipwrecks that we've excavated, most of what we find is the wood from the ship and then ceramic vessels. And so that survives.
Flint discusses ceramics here. Ceramics are often what preserves in shipwrecks. This is true. The wood doesn't normally preserve, especially that long back into the past. Most of it gets destroyed. I'll do a video another time about some shipwreck sites. They're interesting to me. Hopefully they're interesting to you guys. We'll see. I'll do that in another video sometime. As a side note on this passage, I don't think thousands of shipwrecks have actually been excavated by maritime archaeologists. Excavating shipwrecks is really hard. It's expensive. It takes years. It's a big process. It takes multiple archaeologists. It's a whole deal. I don't think it's happened thousands of times. It might have. I can't really find a source that confirms it one way or another, but I don't think so. And I think he just pulled this out of his butt. I would love to see a source on that. I would love to see that. Like, I actually would like to see that if it exists, but he's kind of lost me here on me just trusting his word on things when I can see verifiably that he was wrong on a lot of other stuff. I mean, I have this book, the Encyclopedia of Underwater and Maritime Archaeology. I think it's from like 1998, 1997. And there's maybe a few hundred sites in here. Not that this would necessarily be exhaustive, but it only takes up like one page here. And the font's small, but I don't think so. I don't think it's thousands and thousands of ships that have been excavated. And please, let me see a source. But regardless, the main point, let's get back to it. So even though there are not as many shipwrecks in the archaeological record as Flint claims, even though Flint exaggerated the age of the oldest shipwreck, even though preservation is not as good in the ocean as Flint made it out to be, even though storms and currents can be really bad for shipwrecks, and it can knock them out of the homeostasis that might have protected them, even though Flint claimed that if a civilization were traversing the oceans during the Ice Age, that we would have examples of them, and yet people were traversing the oceans during the Ice Age and we don't have examples of them, it would still be nice if we had a real-world example of a culture that crossed longer stretches of ocean and had ceramics so that we could know how far back the finds of that civilization go. That way we would know in practice, in the real world, how old of a shipwreck targeted archaeology and accidental discovery is capable of finding. Now, it just so happens that we have the Austronesians, the Polynesians, the Micronesians, related peoples. It's kind of a mess. So we have the earliest pottery from the Pacific in 1500 BC. This is the Lapita culture. In a lot of ways, the progenitor culture for Polynesians and Micronesians. There's a lot of mixing in there around the Sahul, Wallacea. This is Southeast Asia, the Philippines, the Polynesian Islands, Micronesian Islands, Melanesian Islands, New Guinea, this sort of area. And they had pottery, and they brought pottery with them on their long ocean voyages where they went thousands of miles. In fact, here is a map, and you can see here, this is Melanesia. It's kind of small, but you can see the Bismarck Islands right here. Everyone kind of comes out from here. There's lots of arrows going in different directions because there's lots of mixing and everything. But they had pottery, and they were traveling on the ocean. This is like hundreds, thousands of miles. This is not a small journey at all, by any means. This is not island hopping 50 kilometers, even though 50 kilometers is a far way to go on a boat. But regardless, this is more in line with what Flint is talking about. These people are traveling with ceramics that would preserve. They're basically indestructible. And they are going to new islands with all of the materials they need to colonize them. They have, yams and chickens and whatever with them. And they are going to their new islands, and we should have shipwrecks from them, right? Based on Flint's understanding of preservation, based on them having ceramics even if the wood would degrade, we would have those ceramics that we know they have. But has any boat ever been found from this Lapita culture that was around a few thousand years ago? No. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't find one. Maybe it's hiding somewhere, but AI tells me no. And also my exhaustive search tells me that it doesn't exist. So then with the Polynesians. We have this great map. The Polynesians, Micronesians as well, and other Austronesian people, they're traveling into all of these areas. Eventually, the Polynesians give up on ceramics, by the way, and they're still colonizing thousands of miles away to places like Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island. They're going to Hawaii. They're going to New Zealand. They're traveling far distances, and they don't need pottery to do it. So that wouldn't even really be a factor. But just for hammering in evidence, there was a time when they were traveling with pottery, and the Lapita culture was as well. Not 30,000 years ago, like Flint says that they would survive, and just a few thousand. We should be able to find them, but why don't we? We don't have them. Maybe the coverage isn't as good as Flint claims. So what is the oldest boat, ship, watercraft that comes out of Polynesia? 1400 AD, 600 years ago. You'd think we would find one earlier than that, considering they're traveling across the oceans for thousands of years, thousands of miles. They're traveling in these journeys. These are big boats. They're colonizing. Yet we don't have any ships. Why don't we have any ships, Flint? Why do we only have one from 600 years ago? Why don't we have the 3,000-year-old Polynesian boat? There must have been a bunch of them. What happened to them? They're supposed to preserve. Underwater is a really great environment, right? Not that good, apparently. But what about elsewhere in Southeast Asia? Maybe there's an older boat. So the oldest one that I could find from the entire Pacific is from the Philippines, and it's from between the 8th and the 10th century AD. So a little bit over 1,000 years. Even though these people, for like 50,000 years, are traveling around on their boats. If we have such good coverage, if the preservation is so good, why don't we have more boats? Why don't we have older boats? Why is it not happening? And what else is still out there to be found? Where are those other 2.7 million shipwrecks? Maybe Graham's, who knows? So we have an extended age of the oldest shipwreck. We have the preservation not being 20 to 30,000 years, probably. We have storms affecting shipwrecks, unlike Flint's claim, which means that a ship that is lucky enough to get into homeostasis might get knocked out of homeostasis. We have many, many fewer ships that are relevant to archaeology and were found by archaeology in the record. It's not 3 million, it's not 300,000, it's a few thousand, maybe tens of thousands. And we have that number from Nicholas Fleming of prior to 3000 BC, 5000 BP before present, 3,000 sites underwater entirely, shipwrecks and domestic and whatever other kind of sites there are. We don't have 13,000 Paleolithic sites. We have 3,600, less than 3,600. Not all of those are even Ice Age. We have 1,500 Clovis sites when he claimed 12,000 for some reason. Were people traversing the ocean during the Pleistocene? Flint implied no. I just think he didn't know. But they were a lot. Flint claims we would have shipwrecks if people were traversing the ocean, but people were traversing the ocean, and we don't have shipwrecks. Flint Dibble got basically everything about maritime archaeology wrong. It doesn't make any sense. Nobody checks. This guy, Professor Dave, doesn't check Flint's data. He even had in his video, he said 3 million. He has a little thing come up on the screen. Oh, it was actually 300,000. You didn't look at the paper, dude. Why didn't you? You didn't fact check anything that Flint said. That's how this works, I guess. Flint got more wrong than just this. Subscribe if you want to see more of these videos. There will be more. There has to be at this point. And for other anthropology videos outside the mainstream. If you want more, watch this video about how Flint Dibble completely misrepresented Graham Hancock in a Twitter thread long before they even talked on the Joe Rogan Experience. He completely got ancient apocalypse and Graham's ideas wrong. He just blatantly misrepresented what Graham thinks and says. Thanks so much for my patrons for supporting my work. If you want to help me keep doing this and you can spare $5, please sign up below. Thanks so much for your time.